Coup to oust Putin. Wagner group is over. This is what we're going to talk about today. And the center of our attention today will be this man, Yevgeny Prigozhin, or Putin's chef, chief of Wagner group, or PMC Wagner. You probably know who he is, and Putin's buddy. And also, he is the chief of the trolls factories. But this is not what we're gonna talk about today, not about trolls factories. This would be another video about that. I'm Elena, this is my channel Enough, it's a political channel. And I'm an expert on the war in Ukraine. And not just the war which started a full-scale invasion in 2022. I researched the war in Ukraine since when it actually started in 2014. And about that you can watch the videos on my channel and about Crimea, because it's very important to understand what happened then, to know what is happening now. And what we're going to talk about today is Prigozhin's kind of coup to oust Putin. And for that, we're gonna, I'll provide you the witness statement, not a witness statement, but a statement from Vladimir Osechkin. He's a political activist and defenders of the rights of prisoners and human rights in general. And that's what we're gonna talk about today, and what is happening to Prigozhin and why his Wagner group is over. Please stay tuned. I will show you some video footage from Maxim Katz video, and we will talk a little bit about Prigozhin, a little bit more in depth. I was asked on Quora quite a bit about him, especially a few months ago when he was kind of on the rise, and people were really concerned about what is gonna happen. Maybe he will, I don't know, replace Putin or something like that, would be new face of Russia, would be this criminal with a sledgehammer killing people. And I said that's not gonna happen. And why I was saying that, and now we know it wouldn't happen, partly because basically who is Prigozhin? He is ex-convict, he was criminal, who was in jail. He wasn't with Putin in the very beginning of Putin's career, which right now Putin is trusting only people who were with him from the very beginning, like somebody who was carrying on his briefcase, or his secretary, or somebody who was his buddy at the time, who worked with him in St. Petersburg or something like that. Prigozhin is none of that. And in Russia, in the society, since USSR time, like even in my time in USSR, there is a hierarchy, and criminals from jail are not very popular there, to say that mildly. And the idea that military, like actual Russian army or FSB or anybody like that would accept this guy as equal to them, it's impossible. They don't treat people fairly in Russia and in USSR. They don't accept them for... Even USSR was supposed to be some sort of a society where people can achieve anything they want, not because they born aristocracy or anything. It wasn't true. Many of people consider themselves new Soviet aristocracy, and part of it was FSB and the army. There was times when the FSB was dissolved, and again used in some Gorbachev times, they wasn't very popular in this and that, but Putin rebuilt it back. He was FSB KGB officer. He brought it back. And this kind of symbols of hierarchy was so bad, it's almost like discrimination by race. You don't expect, in the old days when racism was a real problem, when people actually had slaves, you don't expect white races to treat slaves equally. That's about as much. Prigozhin wouldn't be as equal to the Russian nobility, so-called nowadays nobility, as now. So what Prigozhin find out? What was his know-how he promised Putin that he can achieve the spectacular things on the front and he can take Bakhmut or some other insignificant town which is significant in the eyes of Prigozhin or Putin or something like that. And sometimes he might have promised that Putin will have something to brag about in his New Year speech or something like that. And it didn't happen. What was Prigozhin's know-how? He used criminals from jail. He used actual prisoners. And in 2 words, also people in Quora was asking me about that. Russian army consists from, or let's say Russian forces, which is fighting in the war in Ukraine. Aggressive war Putin started in 2014. But I'm talking about the forces fighting in full-scale invasion 2022. Partly it's a Russian army and a regular army. Partly it's a National Guard, which wasn't even supposed to fight abroad. Another part is more kind of, Russian army consists of kind of 2 parts. It's conscripts and professionals. In the beginning, in the first months of full-scale invasion, in February and March, there were some conscripts who ended up in Ukraine but didn't know that's gonna happen. And there were some professionals. National Guards shouldn't have been in Ukraine in the first place. But they are there. Which is, again, it's kind of like another Putin's private army. The National Guard, which is over 300,000 people, which is as much or bigger than the whole NATO forces in Europe in the end of Cold War. This is Putin's private army, plus the Russian army. Another part is those private, so-called private company, like PMC Wagner, created by Prigozhin. And Prigozhin, it's not a private company. Private army is supposed to be private army. Prigozhin army isn't private. It has planes, anything. So it's basically another Putin's army. And Prigozhin is ruling that army for the sake of Putin in many ways, and for the sake of his own money making and so on. And that's what he did in Africa, that's what he did everywhere. And people in the regular army looking at Prigozhin as like he's basically a nothing, a pauper among aristocracy or something like that. And another piece of Russian army, I'm just finishing describing what Russian army is, Russian forces fighting in Ukraine, is those little armies of so-called Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republic, which is illegal republics Russia created on Donbass after they invaded Ukraine in 2014. And now Putin trying to make them, annex them into Russia, which in Putin's eyes now part of Russia. None of them really, these kind of people from Donetsk and Lugansk Republic, is just, basically nobody care about them, and I'll talk about them little later in some other videos perhaps. Today we're interested in exactly in private PMC Wagner group, which is led by Prigozhin. So what Prigozhin did, he flew into the Russian prisons and free Russian criminals who were arrested, went through court, and court made the decision that they should be in jail for the murders, for multiple murders most likely. Many of them committed more than one murder, and they were serving big sentences like 20 years in prison, 10 years in prison. Some of them, the sentence was almost over. What Prigozhin offered to these people, that they will be pardoned by president, which is hush-hush in Russia. Russians didn't even know how come some guy on a helicopter flying into Russian jail and free prisoners and just let them go. Some of them go into fight in the war in Ukraine, but some of them probably disappear. And how did that happen? Apparently it happened because Putin pardoned them before they even do anything, before they even go to Ukraine. Because otherwise, they wouldn't be out. And I'll show you just now what happened. Journalists from current time proved that the criminals from who was in prisoners of Russian jails were pardoned by Putin. There is information about certain people, and So Putin pardoned them before they did anything for Russia. So Prigozhin took them in the army, into his, I mean, not to the Russian army, but to his PMC Wagner group. And how do you hold multiple murderers? For they didn't run away, for they did not do anything inappropriate. Do you think you can control them easily? No, you can't. That is why Prigozhin in his Wagner group has very strong discipline imposed by cruel methods. Like, if you use the telephone, they just chop your finger off. Or something like that. And I know it from, for example, statements of Vladimir Osechkin, which I will show you a little later in the video. And stuff like that. And even they keep them in a jar, those chopped fingers, and the new people who come to Wagner group from jail, the just new arrivals, they show them that jar, and they're explaining what's gonna happen to them. So Prigozhin just used barbaric methods from centuries ago to keep them in line. And partly, if you saw those executions by the sledgehammer, this is what was happening, and this is why it was done, to scare people, to run away to Ukrainian side, or to just run away back to Russia. This is what it was done, and this is why it was done. So this is one thing what Prigozhin did. He could keep them in line. And another thing, he used them like a Kleenex. He sneezed and throw it out. So he could, under like places like Bakhmut, Soledar, he could just keep pouring them and pouring them, and they get killed and pile those corpses on the fields because nobody cared about those people. And Prigozhin execute them if he choose to. A Russian person executing Russian people without court, without anything. He was like a god. He did what he wanted. That is why they kind of like a wave going and overwhelming Ukrainian forces, because like zombies, they keep going and going, because behind them there are regular Wagner group with machine guns, and they just shoot them if they turn back. If they turn back, or if they retreat, they wasn't even allowed to pick up their fallen ones or wounded ones until the end of the day, because nobody cared will they survive or not. So Prigozhin find a golden mine, but it can't be duplicated on a mass scale, because regular people, even mobilized people who also died, and many of them died in similar manner, they have somebody, relatives, who gonna care about them, who gonna worry about them, and try to find out what happened to them. So it's not some sort of a new thing. This was used centuries ago, and Prigozhin used it, and yet he still couldn't achieve a victory even in Bakhmut. And he admitted this and made it public. But on his quick rise, when he actually started to gain some territory, which he could kill 300 people to move a few meters ahead, he started to be cocky. He started to, together with Kadyrov, Ramzan Kadyrov is the chief of Chechnya, another bandit. And partly, I think they might have been in cahoots with General Surovikin, which was trying to establish their dominance in Russian army. And even we know the videos, I'll show you a little piece, when Prigozhin's people were swearing at the main chief of staff, main commander of Russian army, Gerasimov, like here.
Генерального штаба.
Ты пидор и черт ебаный. Нам нечем воевать, у нас нет снарядов. Там парни гибнут за нас. А мы тут сидим, не помогаем.
And Prigozhin could get away with it for a while, until other things started to happen. This is Vladimir Osechkin, who is helping prisoners and helped one of the people from one of the commanders of Wagner, like Medvedev, who escaped abroad to the West, and started to give a statements about how the Wagner group operates and what criminal acts they committed. And recently there was another video with Wagner group man executed by a sledgehammer, and it seemed like he appears after that and said he was forgiven, but they still didn't find the evidence that the guy actually alive, and so on. So what actually happened? to Prigozhin and his Wagner group. Ministry of Defense was offended by what Prigozhin did, and they trying to get back at him by now they said, well, you find the golden mine of the criminals from jail. Thank you very much. Bye. We don't need you anymore. It's kind of like, I don't know, in the Wild West when somebody find the gold and then some other people came, just shot him and grabbed the gold and took his claim. And this is kind of the same thing. There is no honor there, and they decided, well, we can do that ourselves. Those bureaucrats don't think that they can't keep online multiple murders on the front. Who's gonna babysit them? Prigozhin did it effectively because he used barbaric methods. But they think they can do it themselves. So they don't need Prigozhin anymore. And another bad thing happened. It's that Prigozhin in cahoots with Kadyrov and Surovikin basically trying to organize some sort of a coup against Putin and grab the power. Why? Because Prigozhin understands that he's only alive while Putin needs him. Since he couldn't achieve anything in Bakhmut and plus said that he can't take Bakhmut, well, his life doesn't worth very much. Besides, he only necessary right now only because he still can help with execution of some people in Russia, which is, it happens, as you know, people falling out of the windows. Some woman recently fell down and they kind of conveniently dies and so on. So until it happens, Prigozhin's still alive. So this is what Mr. Osechkin has to say.
Один из источников ЧВК «Вагнер» нам рассказал, что когда его бойцы в порядке ротации вернулись, начали возвращаться из Африки и из Сирии.
He's saying that they have a source in the Wagner group who came back to Russia as a rotation was happening from Africa and Syria and so on.
В Россию. Им психологи и служба безопасности ЧВК «Вагнер» начали задавать вопросы.
The psychologists from the secret service of PMC Wagner started to ask them questions.
Под полиграф, готовы ли они будут следующий
And they test them on a polygraph. And they started to ask them, would they be ready?
Контракт подписать на так называемую, опять же, в кавычках берем, работу в России.
To sign the next contract for some work in brackets, in Russia.
И готовы ли они будут применять автоматическое оружие и минометы в Москве, в московском регионе?
And would they be ready to use automatic weapons and mortars in Moscow region, in Russia?
В случае, если они будут получать соответствующую команду от командиров.
If they will receive such a command from their officers, would they be able to do that, to use weapons in Russia? And of course, as Mr. Osechkin is saying, if human rights activists get that information, Putin get it too. And another thing, that's why General Armageddon Surovikin was replaced, because he was kinda seems to be leaning towards working together with Prigozhin and Kadyrov. Kadyrov right now kind of give up Prigozhin and he started to say, well, maybe I should organize my own PMC company and so on and stuff like that. So Prigozhin understands that against him could be used very horrible methods, the way he used against other people. So as soon as Putin still needs him, he'll be okay, but his life isn't worth very much. And the glory of PMC Wagner is over. Why? Because they lost. They couldn't make a coup. Prigozhin really wanted to get in charge of FSB because there is information in FSB on him. And that's what he wanted. It didn't happen. They couldn't take Bakhmut. They couldn't provide Putin with glorious victories because it's not possible. And Prigozhin happened to say about that. And another thing is that that kind of alliance between him, Kadyrov, and Surovikin didn't work out. The coup didn't work out. And if it was a real, completely done coup or it just was an ideas about that, I can't say for sure. But according to information I have, it wasn't really attempt, but it was some sort of a cahoots between those people. So Prigozhin failed, and his life doesn't worth much, and PMC Wagner is basically over because their know-how is now doesn't belong to them. They can't get prisoners from jail anymore, and that's exactly what Prigozhin now sees. And his tone of talking very changed very much. If before, as I showed you, they were swearing at people, at high commanders of Russian army and this and that, and this was a big insult for the army, that some sort of criminals swear at them and so on. So this is a current time, and I want to show you a little piece here.
Основатель ЧВК «Вагнер» Yevgeny Prigozhin публично жаловался на нехватку бойцов и проблемы с пополнением рядов вагнеровцев.
Right now, Prigozhin is publicly complaining that they don't have weapons, they don't have ammunition, and not enough people go into Wagner Group.
Из-за, цитата, «чудовищной военной бюрократии в России».
Because of, quoting, a terrible military bureaucracy in Russia. That's I'm quoting Prigozhin.
И опровергал сообщения российских провоенных телеграм-каналов об окружении Бахмута.
And also he said that pro-Russian telegram channels were wrong. Bakhmut isn't surrounded. And now this is the PMC Wagner Group soldiers begging Russian military commanders for the munition. They're not swearing anymore. They're not cocky anymore. They're not demanding anymore. They're just begging, whining and sniveling.
Вот это видео.
Вас приветствует артиллерийское подразделение ЧВК «Вагнер».
Here's hello from artillery group from Wagner PMC.
Каждый день мы выполняем сложные боевые задачи и прикрываем наши штурмовые группы.
Every day we are covering our groups and doing fulfilling difficult tasks, military tasks.
На данный момент мы полностью отрезаны от поставок боеприпасов.
At this point in time, we're completely cut off from the. We can't receive anything like munition and so on.
И это отразится на всем ходе войны. Мы отбатрачим за вас, сделаем эту работу.
The time of Wagner Group is over. The time of Prigozhin is over. I wouldn't bet on he will be alive for very long. And this is a little bit of funny thing. Well, it's not funny. This is a sledgehammer. Soon will be 23rd of February, which is in Soviet Union was Red Army Day, and Russia is kind of Army Day. Is kind of like a Father's Day, Men's Day, basically holiday. So you can give your loved ones a sledgehammer and say, "Happy 23rd of February." This is how it looks like. On this piece it said PMC Wagner. And you can see, you can put it on the wall and make your loved ones very happy, but by receiving a Wagner fan community. Don't be afraid of anything and believe in your path and go to your aim to be worthy of the memory of your ancestors. PMC Wagner. So, if you want to make your loved ones happy on the Father's Day, this is the, it's not covered in blood yet, so, but this is the gifts what Russian women could buy for their men. Anyways, thank you for watching and have a great evening or a day.